So my name is Harold Sipe. I primarily am, I do all our graphic design and kind of printing, logistical stuff, like I would say producer, art director at Small Monsters Games.
And I'm Meg. I'm the game designer at Small Monsters Games. But our whole company is the two of us, so I'm also like logistics and shipping and distribution and all that other stuff.
So today we wanted to just talk a bit about sort of personal experience or memoir and how that translates into not only the theme of our games, but I would say even, you know, the mechanics, and really that personal experience becomes the core of a lot of the games that we have produced and ones that we're working on producing that we'll show you a bit from that today. Just a little bit of background. Meg and I worked in the video game industry. Are you comfortable saying how many years, or do you just kind of want to
several years?
Several, for a longer period of time, I guess. We actually met in the video game industry, which is probably one of the happier outcomes, I think, in some ways, of working in games. You know, so we got married, and eventually, you know, life kind of took us on different paths. I still work in technology, but sorry, we're having a little trouble with that background. Still work in technology, but not directly on game apps. And Meg, you?
Outside of games, I work as an ESL teacher. You're about to see how teaching English has influenced some of our games and some of the game mechanics in them.
So, you know, once we left the game industry professionally, like, you know, we love games, and, you know, that had been so much a part of our lives for a long time. So, you know, we wanted to continue it. And so what we did is we really wanted to, you know, still be involved. So we, you know, I would say we founded Small Monsters Games, but what we really did was start making games. And, you know, we did, I'd say one difference, rather than just like a creative project, like we knew that we wanted to do it sustainably and kind of do it basically as a business. Is that pretty fair?
Yeah. So we had started, once we left working in video games full time. It started as a creative outlet. Just I made games on index cards and Excel spreadsheets, and then Harold made it pretty, right? And then we really missed, or at least I really missed that creative outlet of full-time game dev. So we started to do this as more and more focus.
So that's just a little bit of the background. I mean, so what we want to talk to today is, you know, kind of what we on the first slide is the idea of like personal experience and how that, you know, how we took that, you know, our interest and stories and things like that, and turned that into like actual playable games, and how those experiences inform that. You know, coming out of the game industry, a lot of times, you know, we were both like in positions where we'd be involved with, say, you know, the game, you know, the theme of the game, narrative design, like how the game, you know, and all those decisions. A lot of times, I think, you know, it's great to work collaboratively. Like, I think that's the best thing about the video game industry. You know, but at times it can also be frustrating in that, you know, you have a real passion for a theme or you know, a particular feeling or a narrative, and, you know, maybe that doesn't match the assets, it doesn't match kind of what you went through in the green light process to get the game made, and so it changed. So one thing that we really wanted to focus on when we wanted to make games ourselves was we wanted to really talk about things that, you know, we knew and we cared about, and have that be kind of the springboard. So do you want to talk a little bit about Takeout?
So Takeout is a social set building game where you're trying to collect all of the flavors of Chinese food. And all of your setbacks are language difficulties, speaking Mandarin. And it is directly influenced by the 3 years I spent living and working in China. I love the food. It was always kind of like an adventure to be with usually other American expats, trying to use our limited language skills to get what we needed, right? And there's kind of a fun challenge of, wow, this language is so hard, but the result is, okay, I'm gonna try living in this other country and trying this other food. And the inspiration for this game was just my time living abroad, and the mechanic and then the art that Harold added later was all based on experiences that I had. This is one of our setback cards in Takeout, and it's just mayo is we don't have that, we're out of it, and that's like when you're learning a language and you very carefully asked, hi, I would like the chicken, please, and they tell you, yeah, we don't have that. It's this like terrible upset, and that's what I've tried to bring to the game.
I mean, would you say a lot of the sort of action cards or the mechanics that are like, these are based on your experiences trying to order food, like, pretty directly, right?
Yeah, the phrases here are kind of like survival Mandarin, and you know, as I don't know if you guys have studied a second language, but when you're able to communicate successfully, it's a really great feeling. And what I hope to share with players in Takeout is this like success and frustration and just the fun of living abroad.
So when we went to translate that, and you know, Beck talks about you know, her experience even trying to order food, as we mentioned, like it was more than, so you know, we knew it would be a food-based game. We knew it would be a set collection type game, just the mechanic based on that, wanting to talk about that experience. But then from a visual standpoint, it was really how to translate it to a broader audience, right? Because like, I think that's like the experience itself, I think we're both really excited about. We understood like, hey, that's, you know, it's kind of a challenge to do that, but then how do we?
Yeah, the original game was not really like very, very friendly to new players. I had a lot of jokes about like words that I misunderstood in Mandarin, or like different food like enjoyed in different provinces. And you know, I lived in China long before I met Harold, and it didn't really translate to someone who hadn't done it. So you know, Harold turned this into something that you could see and enjoy and understand pretty quickly.
I mean, I guess my way into it visually really became these sort of like, you know, I've had that experience, especially like I grew up in the really rural South, and honestly, you know, we didn't really have Chinese food at all, even like, you know, kind of orange chicken from the corner or whatever, for a long time. I mean, I was much older, I think, the first time I tried Chinese food. And then, you know, the experience of, you know, going someplace really authentic, like, you know, in like the Chinatown here or New York, or, you know, on the West Coast, you know, like navigating dim sum for the first time. So like that was little bits that I could, you know, take from that experience, start to relate to myself. And visually, my thought was, well, I think the most accessible way, you know, that people, you know, universally would maybe see this type cuisine would be this this idea of you know, the takeout menus, or trying to order choose and order Chinese food that way. And we'll get to the final box and kind of the final visual treatment on that. So that was one thing. So it was born of the personal experience, and really I think the sort of takeout imagery, the restaurant imagery, kind of evolved out of that.
Yeah, and can you go ahead one? So my original title, this little comic is, as you're learning Chinese, you learn ni hao as hello. But then living in China, nobody says that. This one, Trepannama, is literally have you eaten? And it's just like, hey, how are you? And my original plan was that I was going to call it this Trepannama title, like have you eaten? And it was going to be about language, and it was going to be about culture, and it was all going to tie together. And you know, that's not really something that we could express visually, or something that we could brand and share with others.
So when we looked at, you know, we went through several iterations, we felt like we wanted to key visually off this idea of takeout menu, or like one of the calendars. Like, you can't see it because we have a background up, but we actually have one behind us, probably from the last time we ate Chinese food out before quarantine. Yeah. But you know, the box seemed like, you know, just really, it has such a universal visual recognition that we wanted to try and translate that, so that you know, and this is part of, like, when we talk about a bit, like on the business side, although it did kind of serve our narrative and our story, like we wanted something that was like, would be good at point of purchase, a small game at a good price point, but also recognizable, something that if you're at the counter and you're kind of looking at the display, you know, it's memorable. It's something that might visually jump out at you. All right, so that is Takeout. So now do you want to talk a little bit about the new game that we're prototyping?
Yeah. So our new game is about a cooperative game about a team on a starship. And originally this was, I love Star Trek, and I love that kind of campy, silly space story with like the Orville, or playing that the game Space Team. And when I started working on this, I thought I was telling a story about how much I love Star Trek. And working on this now that we're in quarantine, and my day job is teaching ESL, so I've been teaching English as a second language online. I've been much more focused on the cooperative aspect of this game. The story was originally like, you all take different roles, and you're trying to navigate these space calamities. And through different iterations of this game, it's more and more like the personal side of it has sort of come up by accident, and more of our it's about getting these crazy orders. I'm not sure if you can see the card, the other one. The other one? Yeah. I'm not sure if you can see the orders, but they're all like, your ship has been struck by a meteor. The teleporters are down, the translators are down, like all these horrific things happening. And now the other one. Mm-hmm. This one is the only thing that you can really rely on are the other players, your coworkers. So in this case, I discovered that I was telling a second story all about struggles of online teaching in coronavirus, and just having these wild setbacks, and just you and your coworkers are doing the best you can.
Yeah, I mean, it's something. This one was interesting. I mean, I'm a huge Star Trek fan, and enjoy, like, I mean, if we talk about games like Space Team, right? Yeah. Like that was something that really, like I love that game. It really, you know, stuck out, had an impact on me. So the idea of doing something like lighter with a sci-fi theme, like I really like the idea. I mean, some of it just, you know, thematically on the sci-fi, like, I mean, some of my favorite Star Treks, whether original series or Deep Space Nine, like, you know, Star Trek is funny. Like, they're humorous episodes. I mean, you know, the original, you know, Trouble with Tribbles, DS9, I always think about Little Green Men, where Quark and Odo go back to the 1950s. Like, so, you know, something that was lighter was appealing. But yeah, I mean, when you talk about that, I mean, the interesting thing about this one is I feel like it was almost an extra narrative theme or push, because of, like, you know, we're developing it we went into quarantine, and then the idea of like doing something cooperative and working with the team, like that took on a lot more meaning, I think, as we continued to try and develop it.
Yeah, it changed from being like, I don't say parody because that sounds negative, like homage maybe to Star Trek episodes, and started to become more like cooperatively handling the disasters that are thrown at you. And the original mechanic was all the players were competing for promotions, and it's now changed to a like fully cooperative game. All the players are just trying to survive what's happening.
Yeah, no, this one's been fun. I'm really excited when we can get back to, events where we could, play test this with a group, or, that feels like it'll be the realization of something we've been like desperate to do for like the last 6 months, and so it's taken on a lot of interesting feeling that way. So before we move, Aaron, I just want to check, is there any questions or anything? I didn't want to just talk over everything if folks had questions or anything like that.
We're good right now.
Sounds good. All right, so I'm gonna press on, and if you do have questions about anything, feel free to drop them in chat. Oh, go
so
ahead.
One just came up, actually.
That's great.
So I'm going to turn myself on just so we can look at each other. So we have a question. How do you track that collaboration? Do you use anything like game clocks or another mechanic?
That's a great question. The answer is right now, so because we're married, it's a little bit more informal. Like my job most of my life has been to make an action plan and execute an action plan, whether producer or project manager. And honestly, we're kind of getting to a scale where we need to do that more. I think there was almost a conscious rejection of that initially because we just wanted to collaborate and have fun. And now we're kind of to the point, from a tool standpoint, I think the ones you bring up are great. I think we would end up, I don't think we need anything heavy duty as Jira, maybe something like Basecamp where we can set task and track task and assign task. We go ahead.
Yeah, we do a lot of shared documents.
Yeah.
People, and we also do a lot of just general married communication.
Right.
Hey, you didn't get to this, so I did it.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
Meg, you're still a little quiet, I'll just say.
Here, I'm going to move a little closer.
Okay.
There we go. Yeah, I know it's tough when you're sharing the same spot. The other thing we have so far is not a question, but a comment, which is that the folks here would love to be invited for playtesting that game.
That's great.
Can you flip to the end and show our contact information?
Yes. Speaking of things that can get done, I don't have the Instagram on
That's
that screen. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so we have Facebook and Twitter, and I'm also just Meg at smallmonstersgames.com, and we would love to have others when it's like safe to meet up in the same place and all touch the same cards. We would love to have more playtesters.
Fantastic.
If you go to the website, we have a newsletter too. It's been a little slow in quarantine, but as we get to a point where gatherings, will be a better idea, like feel free to sign up. Like we're happy. Basically, we send updates like on games that are currently available, but things are in development, and as next year, hopefully, as people are coming together again, we would do things like announce playtesting events and things like that.
Perfect. Well, you want to continue on, and I'm sure more questions will come, and I'll give you a heads up.
Absolutely. So, just from a business standpoint, like Takeout turned out to be a bigger deal. Like we've had, certainly for a two-person operation that have had to manage the sales and the distribution, like we've had respectable sales, and in some ways, kind of an unintended side effect of Takeout has been we spend a lot more time managing, I think, that game after release than we sort of anticipated initially.
Yeah, I kind of joked in the beginning about like doing our shipping and distribution. But it's true, you know, when we do retail sales, you know, like just physically mailing out the boxes and keeping up with our vendors, and like that's been a surprise responsibility. I really thought like, okay, cool, I finished the game. It doesn't have any bugs. People can play it. I thought like I was kind of finished.
Well, the only reason I bring that up is I talk about the other games. So you'll see that we're developing 2 games for 2021. Well, originally for 2020, but you know, yeah, I know that's gone the way of maybe some other plans. But 2021, and part of the reason that we really want to focus on getting 2 games out is just that, you know, we kind of went from designing and making games that we wanted to do to a lot of business and distribution stuff that is important to do, but we don't necessarily like, you know, it's not what we want to focus on. So we want to have more titles out.
That was like a very polite way of saying we just want to make cool games and we don't want to do the business side.
Right. That, yeah, but thankfully there is a business side. But anyway, I bring that up. So, you know, Meg talked about the space game, and kind of, you know, where that came from narratively for her. And, you know, as we were doing 2 games, we really thought it was important to be, we wanted to have both our point of view. Like, they both will be represented in the game, but so I came from a background, you know, I think I mentioned earlier, like growing up in a really rural area, and a lot of that experience to me was, you know, a lot of outdoor stuff and a lot of camping, and frankly, as part of that, like a lot of ghost stories, right? A lot of you know, all sorts of things you sort of tell over the campfire, and that was a huge part of my growing up. It's a huge part of my memories growing up. And, you know, that kind of led to all the things that you've been seeing here on the screen, you know, being very important to me and being kind of foundational in a lot of things that I pursued later and went on to do. So, you know, as we thought about another title, so I you know, this is one, the narrative here translate, because this is actually, you know, in some ways we're lucky with Takeout in that, you know, Meg had the initial concept based on her experience. We play tested it. It did change, but it didn't fundamentally change. Like the rules changed. We introduced more action cards. Like it's that sort of, I would say it evolved more to change. Is that fair? Mm-hmm. So this is an example of a game that actually was pretty close to a lot of my experience in video games, where we had a game that we started out, or I'm going to say I started out because I think I was a lot of the problem on this front, where it's like I had a central theme, where it's like, look, I want a storytelling composition, and from a feeling standpoint, it's like it must have that feeling of telling these sort of stories around a campfire in close quarters or over a spirit board or kind of whatever your you know, your spooky sort of setting is. And man, I think I pursued that concept with almost this zealot, like, you know, like whenever we would play test and get feedback in, it was really about, okay, well, that's great, but how do we bring that back to the central idea that we want this to be something where you sit around and you tell a story, right? And the problem with that,
but there wasn't really a game mechanic.
Yeah.
Harold had made these gorgeous, Harold had made these gorgeous cards, all these like creepy artwork, collage stuff, abandoned buildings, photos, and they had like little snippets to be kind of prompts for storytelling, and that was a cool concept, but there wasn't really like a game mechanic, and either you played with a bunch of friends who loved telling stories, and then you barely needed the prompts, or you played with a bunch of people who weren't really comfortable making up a story on the fly, and the prompts didn't really do anything.
So yeah, I think that's fair. So we wrestled with this for a long time, and I mean that's something I think where collaboration. You know, I'm reminded of like there was a This American Life episode where there was this, Ira Glass talked about the worst job he ever had in radio, and it was this producer who kept coming in, he had this concept for the show, and it's like, I want it to be all these like really famous people sitting down having a conversation. And the whole tension in the story was that's not really the idea for a show. And I think, where it took us, we explored a lot of storytelling games. We played a lot of those games ourselves. We changed the rule set here, and it just like we couldn't find the fun factor. And I mean, that's more than narrative. Like narrative should lead us to a place where we can find the fun factor, and then the fun factor is the game. And we really couldn't find that sort of in the parameters initially. But we were still, or maybe me primarily, but at that point, I think even you had some investment in. And you mentioned like the card art and some of the scenarios that were, that were in the original game. So we really retooled it. And so what we have now is much more, this is a game that, again, we'll be play testing soon. I mean, Meg and I aren't play testing, but hopefully actually, working, getting together with real players and seeing how it goes. There had to be a quest, and there had to be kind of, something that you want, right? Like I think even in video games, like, what, it's just like any narrative, like what's the motivation? Like what does each character want, and how does that lead them to things? So this really transformed into a game where we took this idea, and maybe you folks have seen, I've seen hundreds of them, these kind of like supernatural like ghost hunter shows. There's like Ghost Adventures, the Ghost Bros, like all that kind of stuff. Not that we took a lot from that, but this idea of like, hey, we're going to go out and we're going to find these supernatural things, or we're going to try and prove these supernatural things. So the art you can see here, you can see there's like some of these tools they use, like the EMF spike shows like electrical fields or what have you. And so you kind of take the player fantasy of someone that's looking for these things. And then was there I'm sorry, I didn't want to.
No, we shifted it from, you see this creepy basement, you see this haunted dark stairwell. Instead of like tell a story about it, you are, and the other players are basically those hunters. You're exploring the house together, and so it's still collaborative. You're still telling a story about ghosts. You're still using these like amazing location pictures, but now your goal is like to be the star of the ghost show, and not just like to invent a story. The story is like more laid out for you.
So there's more a competitive aspect, and there becomes more of a player investment because of that. So that that really kind of talks about the evolution of the game, and how we kind of had maybe started with kind of a narrative want or need, and really are working our way through, I think, to a better kind of actual playable solution there. And that I'm just thrilled that we can keep some of that mood in a game. I think that's kind of important. I mean, it's very important to me because it's a mood, it's a theme, and kind of feeling I respond to. But I mean, this goes back, I think, to our experience in video games, like easily going back to the initial game where we just would have these play test sessions that some of them were okay, some of them most definitely were not.
They were good or bad depending on who was what kind of storytelling they liked. Yeah.
So and a lot of times in a lot of video game developers, they'll cancel titles. Like you'll build an alpha, you'll build a demo, you'll test it for all these various sort of metrics, but the biggest metric, I think, at the end of the day is always like, well, is it fun? Is it a captivating play loop, right? Like one thing that we took from our time in casual games is I always think about, like, when we look at our games, like easy to learn, easy to play, quick reward. And that to me are the three kind of criteria that I think if you get that kind of gratification, you know, through the primary play cycle, I think it leads to investment. So this was a game, honestly, I was kind of heartbroken about, just because like I cared about the theme so much and just really kind of wanted to see it through. And you know, I think it's something we could have canceled and just said, hey, look, it's not, you know, it's not pursuable. But I'm really excited now that we sort of have that, you know, we've added this narrative layer to it that has like an actual playable loop that actually, you know, gives people motivation and has a competitive nature to it. Cool. Well, not necessarily ending, but that's our last slide. And I did want to put up the you know, our socials. If you know, if you wanted to connect, as I mentioned, you know, if you're interested in finding out more about kind of the titles in development or Takeout or any of our games, go to smallmonstersincgames.com. I think we got to sign up for the newsletter right on.
Sign up for the newsletter right on the site.
Right on the site. Yeah. So you can go there, connect with us on Facebook. You know, we update fairly regularly. Well, we try to anyway, but
I'm not joking. If anybody is interested in helping us play test either the space game or the horror game, we would really welcome that.
Yeah, it's something too that on both these games that we're now looking at, given the situation, that we're doing some internal play testing, meaning that we're banging against them and making sure that these assumptions that we made are true, like from the point where we had, you know, this idea for theme or narrative, and now, you know, trying to prove out gameplay. So, you know, we're looking at possible print and play packages for these games, depending on. So, you know, again, if you have interest in that, like, I think that's something in the next month or so we're going to, you know, be looking at and possibly sending to players. So feel free to reach out. Like, we'd be really thrilled to share that with anyone who wanted to take a look.
Awesome. Thanks, Meg and Harold. So folks, you can continue to send questions, but I'll ask one just about sort of the transition from video games to tabletop. How was that for you? And you know, what were some of the, you've talked a little bit about some of the challenges you've had to overcome with storytelling, but if you could talk about, you know, going from one medium really to another.
Do you want to start?
The logistics are entirely different on working on a card game than working on a computer game. The we moved about a year ago, and there were just prototypes and half-finished game. Like, we had junk for building card games all over the place, and that just wasn't part of my life working on computer games.
I mean, there is a physical aspect of it. There is kind of, you know, the printing, the idea that, you know, the timelines become a lot different if you're, you know, in some ways they're, like when I started, I almost wish I could, maybe I'll just rip one off the wall, because I have a couple up. So wait, let me.
Yeah, you're fading into the background.
Fading into the background. So yeah, anyway, I only bring this up to show I used to work on box games, right? And in some ways that feeling was similar in that we had to get to a gold master, meaning there was a disc with the game that we're saying is complete, that works, is shippable by a certain date to have it mass produced. And that's probably the closest. I mean, when we moved out of that to where the very little things were shipping in boxes or have any, you know, physical media, like, you know, I just showed, in some ways that was kind of freeing, because like not only, you know, could we sort of set that ship date with a lot less sort of overhang or headache, but, you know, we could also release endless kind of updates. I mean, you know, it's when was shipping PC games, you know, and there would be a Windows update or something that came not long after it, you know, that sort of stuff, like doing a patch or figuring that out was, man, that was kind of a hurt. It was a big problem. So, just there's a lot of work, logistics, and planning that go into like physical media that are not. The other thing is, I think you have to be a lot more dialed in some ways on your gameplay to make a compelling game on board games. Not that I think you can fake it in video games. I think that's completely wrong. But in video games, you have a lot more levers you can pull, right? Like you can have cool animations. You can have kind of a cool intro sequence. There's all kind of like things we could do that if things were being tested, then we're like, okay, we'll spice this up or we'll move this around. And that's not like, I kind of like board games in that you have to have your gameplay together, because there's no other lever you can lean on. It's either fun to play or it's not. I think there's things you can do to raise visibility. I think you can have, a nice looking box. You can have really dialed in sort of art. I think we even see that in the space right now. Like, we're committed to making these smaller packed game experiences, and we hear from distributors all the time. It's like, look, make a big box, put art on it, put a bunch of plastic doodads in it, and sell it for $60, right? And I'm not saying that. Look, they're like behind us. There's a shelf full of those games. I'm not disparaging that at all. Like, they've gotten my $60 more than once.
Right.
And I think they're good games, but that again is kind of a lever you can kind of pull, or something you can begin to leverage to get interest. But it's not going to carry it. Like, if the game's not fun, it's not going to dazzle. You know what I mean? Like, there's no amount of box art, no amount of card art is going to dazzle you into like, wow, this is a fun game. If it's not a fun game, it's not a fun game.
Right. If you don't pay attention to mechanics, it doesn't matter how beautiful you made it or how many cool additions there were. We have another question from the audience, and it says, I'm sure people are getting game ideas inspired by current events. What advice would you give them?
That's a really good question. I mean, in some ways, I would just go back to kind of what I was just like ranting on, is put it in index cards. And if whatever mechanic you have is compelling, like, the other thing I would say, and this I think applies to like making a graphic novel or anything else, like, there's going to be this compulsion because you've played these big complicated games I've talked about, right? And you probably like, you come to things because you have this huge epic idea, and I get that. But like, do not lead with like Dune as your first thing. Like, you're probably not, you know what I mean? Like, you're not gonna like do a novella and learn from that, and then you will have the arsenal to tell bigger stories or make bigger experiences. So I think, one, make sure it works on index cards purely as a play loop, and if it doesn't, like, work on that piece of it. And two, like, I'm trying to think of the most complicated gameplay. Like, oh my God, that Battlestar Galactica board game. Like, that's probably not
3 hours.
That's probably not, and look, everything has an exception, right? Like, maybe somebody starts there and that's great. But in my experience, like, we started with a card game because we felt we could reasonably test that, and we could reasonably produce and market it. And we did that purposely because of the scale.
And that makes a lot of sense. And I think sometimes people make things overcomplicated, and they're actually, you play them once and then you keep them on the shelf and never play them again, right? Because it was too hard. One more question. What are some ways to make a game affordable? That's a really good one.
You want to talk about that?
Yes.
Or I can talk? Okay, go ahead.
I have a lot of thoughts about that. When we were first prototyping, we used Game Crafter, and they have a couple different, I guess, settings or like basic packages you can get. So because it was like a 30 card pack or 64 card pack or like certain arrangements, it kind of encouraged me to think about, okay, well, what am I getting in a 100 card deck that I didn't have in a 64 card deck. What's being added to the game? With that space game, I showed you guys some of the cards, and we've been considering if we're going to do miniatures too, or if we're going to do just cards. And I've been really forced to think about, is the game better because we made the box better, because we added miniatures, because we have sliders, or is it something that we could just do on a card?
Well, like Takeout, the biggest example of that to me is like, so we have like, we have a rule set. We did a list of all the action cards, and our first instinct is like, oh, we'll do a booklet, right? Which pushed the entire card set and everything to a bigger box and made it exponentially more expensive to produce. Now, when we put that as a folded sheet insert into a regular card deck, that was something, I mean, if we talk about price point, you could produce, a full deck of cards with an insert. I mean, you're not looking at like the very top level of that would be $150, like manufacturing, right? Like $150 a deck. And then if you can get your cost down to that, then you have a lot more room. And like Meg said, I mean, it's a thing all the time. Like, yeah, we'd love to do booklets. Like, I'd love to do, I mean, like you're saying, like miniature, and we do hit that in our process. But, part of our process too is just like, look, if we thought that figurines were critical to a fun gameplay experience, like we would just price that, all over China and figure it out. But a lot of times what happens is that we get into it and start doing cost comparison. It's like, well, what does this actually add to the game?
Right. Is this a bells and whistles thing, or is this a really necessary for gameplay thing? That makes a lot of sense.
When you play a board game and you're like, oh, this is so neat. They've got the little sliders and got all this other stuff, and we could do it, and Harold would make the art look amazing. And then you have to like be more realistic. Like,
I mean,
we can probably do this.
Realistic is one thing, but that is cost, I mean, to the original question. But yeah, I mean, even having made several of these things now, like, I mean, keeping your costs down, I think is knowing exactly how much of the frill you need to put in the game for the perceived value. Like is the box art and the gameplay, like, does that present enough perceived value? Do you think, if you have several pieces in your game, yeah, maybe go to the big, illustrated game board, because that's the perceived value, right? Like, that's part of the game.